Never buy a slave off the dark web. Then where else am I? Hey, by dark web vault. What's good? How your day going? How's your morning, your evening, your night, whenever you're watching this video? I'm not about to talk your ears off, about to jump right into this and see what's going on. But hey, you want to check out the original video? The link will be in the description below. But let's go.
When I was 18 years old, I was arrested for selling fake IDs on the dark web. I was actually pretty careful in covering my tracks, but in the end, it didn't matter. At that point, I'd been selling the IDs for 3 years without any issues, but I got cocky and told the wrong person who I really was. Turned out, that person was an FBI informant. I was threatened with 7 years in prison, and I probably would have done the full 7 if a mysterious benefactor hadn't come along. In the end, my benefactor, a billionaire named Luther Speck, offered me the services of an excellent lawyer if I agreed to work for him when I got out. He wouldn't tell me what the work was, saying that I had to agree unconditionally before he would spend a dime on my defense. What can I say? I was desperate. For an 18-year-old kid, 7 years in prison seems like a life sentence. And since the feds had seized all my assets, I agreed.
And you won't even do the whole 7. Go ahead, sit down. I ain't accepting that one. I'm gonna go ahead and sit down. Doggy bone.
And since the feds had seized all my assets, I agreed to the bargain. Thanks to the lawyer Speck hired for me, I only spent 2 years in prison. But now that I'm in this situation, I wish I would have told Speck to shove it. I wish I would have done the full 7 years. Because unless some sort of miracle happens, I'm going to die a very painful death very soon.
Boy, they accepted them terms.
I wish I would have done the full 7 years. Because unless some sort of miracle happens, I'm going to die a very painful death very soon. Mr. Speck wants you to acquire him as slave. At first, I thought the guy was joking. I laughed in his face. He was Speck's right-hand man, a burly, hammer-headed guy named Simon Wretch. We were sitting in a Rolls-Royce Phantom, Wretch in the driver's seat, and me in the passengers. I hadn't been out of prison for even 5 minutes, and this was happening. Of course, Speck wasn't anywhere to be seen. He'd sent his thug to give me the message. I'd just been in the process of drooling over the plush interior of the Rolls when Wretch said it. A slave? I replied. Get the hell out of here. Wretch grabbed my head and slammed it into the opulent, wood-paneled dashboard. He didn't do it too hard, but I had the feeling that it was more out of concern for damaging the car than for damaging my face. Jesus!
Damn.
I said, putting my hands to my head. What the hell, man? Mr. Speck wants you to acquire him a slave. A girl. A young girl, but not too young. Preferably white. Although Middle Eastern or Hispanic are acceptable if she is an exquisite beauty. Not black. He will not accept a black slave.
Damn.
I shook my head. There was so much wrong with what he just said.
I mean, well, good, but damn. he said that's played out. They already did that 400 years ago.
There was so much wrong with what he just said.
He said,
I didn't know where to start. I sold fake IDs, man. I don't know shit about getting a slave on the dark web. Even if I did, I wouldn't help you. You know how wrong that is? Wretch reached into an inside pocket of his $2,000 suit and pulled a phone out. He swiped and tapped on it with his thumbs for a few moments before turning and showing it to me. This is your little sister, right? It was. He had a picture of Jenna with her friends outside of the high school. She was a sophomore. The full implication of that picture fell on my head like a hammer dropped from a construction scaffolding. All at once, I felt angry, sick, and desperate. It was not a good feeling. She is a very attractive young girl, Wretch said. White, too. Just how Mr. Speck likes them. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I nodded, my ears ringing. Fine. I'll do what you want. That was the agreement, Wretch said, putting the phone away. Now I will take you where you will do the work. What do you mean? I want to go see my parents and my sister. Not yet. First, you work. You can see them later. And that was it. He took me to Speck's compound. But before we ever even got near the place, He made me put a blindfold on. We must have been in the car for an hour after that. He set me up in a small house on the property, a few hundred yards from the mansion. In my new home, there was a computer set up with all the latest and greatest. I was locked in and under guard 24/7. I told them it would take time, but they said I had 2 weeks to get it done. It came down to the wire, but I did it. I finally found a site on the dark web that was legit. This was only after wading through several others that were FBI honeypots, complete scams, or weirdos pretending to be human traffickers to get their rocks off. But even once I found the site, it wasn't easy. So I had to go through a whole rigmarole of finding out which of the 5 girls they had on offer was right for spec. Then there was haggling for price, deciding on a time, place, and method of exchange, and always assuring the guy I only knew as Bodyman 438 that we were legit buyers. The girl didn't have a name on the website. She was just known as number 3. She was white, with green eyes and blonde hair, and she looked terrified in all the pictures.
Hell yeah.
I couldn't help but think of Jenna the whole time I was doing it. The girl even kind of looked like my little sister. And all the time, I hoped that it was all a big scam and that there was no girl. I thought about escaping, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. They knew where my family lived. So when the day came and I boarded Spec's jet, I was sick with guilt. I didn't know what the billionaire wanted with the girl, but I knew it wasn't good. And whatever was going to happen to her was going to happen because of me. I stared out the window for most of the flight to Panama, where we were going to meet the sellers. But about 2 hours into the flight, Spec sat down across from me and started talking. "The sooner you make peace with this, the better," he said. For a billionaire, he looked sloppy. He was wearing a rumpled beige and gold tracksuit with flip-flops. He was in his early 50s, I guessed, but he didn't carry himself like he was. His hair was shaggy, and I could see some kind of sauce from his lunch drying at the corner of his mouth. "With what?" I asked. "Buying people like they're nothing more than products?" Spec clapped his hands together. "Exactly. That's exactly right. If you ever want to be rich, you've got to separate yourself from the notion that people are people. Think of them as numbers and collections of preferences. The more numbers you can manipulate, which means getting good at zoning in on those preferences, the more money you can make. But if you go around thinking of them as individuals who each deserve all that pursuit of happiness bullshit, you'll never get anywhere in this world. There's a term for people who can't feel empathy," I said. "It's called psychopathy. Well, guess what, boy? Our economic system rewards psychopathy. So if it doesn't come naturally to you, you gotta learn it. Train it into yourself. You'll be better off, believe me." I scoffed and looked back out the window. "Do you know..."
What a scene. Hey, Dark Web Vault, this is wild. You are not holding back on this video.
"Believe me." I scoffed and looked back out the window. "Do you know what your fake IDs were used for?" Spec asked. "Do you have any idea?"
Oh boy.
I ignored him, staring at the clouds below the jet. "What if a fake ID that you sold got some kid some booze, and then he drove his car and killed someone?" Spec asked. "What if one of the IDs helped a murderer get out of the country? What if they were used to commit widespread fraud? You already know that they were, so get off your high horse. You've already had a taste of what it takes to succeed, and you want more, don't you?" "Selling fake IDs is not the same as buying a f***ing person," I snapped. This got the attention of the 3 bodyguards on the plane. Spec laughed. "Careful now," he said. "You better watch what you say to me, or I'll make a date with your sister Jenna." "You motherfucker!" I lunged at him, but Wretch grabbed me and slammed me to the floor. The other 2 bodyguards, Pollard and Yule, took turns kicking me until Spec finally got tired of laughing and told them to stop. I got up from the floor, bruised and bleeding, and sat in silence for the rest of the trip. When we landed, the handoff was surprisingly easy. We were at a private airport, and the human traffickers were there waiting for us, parked a good distance away. I wanted to stay on the plane, but Spec wouldn't let me, so I got off with everyone else. The slavers got the girl out of their SUV and allowed us to see her. Most of the slavers were wearing masks, but I could tell from their skin that they were a multiracial bunch, black, white, and brown, as far as I could tell. Then they sent one man over, an Asian guy and the only one not wearing a mask, who provided us with the bank account information. Spec initiated the transfer. When the Asian guy was happy, he signaled his people and one guy brought over the girl, who was wearing a white and pink sundress and looked like she'd been drugged. She let herself be led over without protest. We loaded up again and were on our way. They put the girl in the back room of the jet, Spec's private bedroom, and put a guard outside the door. Although Spec stared toward the room for most of the flight, I wasn't surprised that he didn't go back there. I had heard enough chatter around the compound about how he wanted everything to be perfect. He had everything planned out. The sick bastard. For the entire flight, I thought about killing Spec. There was no doubt I would die in the process. Still, it might be worth it. It wouldn't free the girl, but it would be something. It would ease my conscience, if nothing else. By the time we got back to the compound, I talked myself into trying it. If I didn't try, I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror again.
You should have done that when you was back somewhere in your own territory. I was thinking that. I'm like, yo, why would you want to boot up once you're on the plane? You're legit stuck on their damn grounds, going even further where they are. Yeah, you've been screwed.
By the time we got back to the compound, I talked myself into trying it. If I didn't try, I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror again. So when Pollard escorted me back to my little house, my prison, I put my shitty excuse for a plan into action. There were no knives in my little house, and no heavy objects I could use as weapons, so I had to get creative. I knocked on the inside of the front door. They kept me locked inside, and called out to Pollard.
"Those traffickers contacted me,"
I shouted.
"They said Interpol is onto them and they know who we are."
Pollard unlocked and opened the door. As soon as he did, I brought the can of cooking spray up in my right hand and sprayed it into his eyes. As he stumbled back, eyes wrenched shut, I threw the can down and leaped at him with my belt in my hands. I got the belt around his neck and moved to his back, tightening it. I held onto the end of the belt as Pollard, who outweighed me by a good 50 pounds, threw me around. He slammed me into the front of the house and even threw himself on me in the grassy front yard. And although I was pretty sure he'd cracked a rib or two, I held on until he stopped moving. And I held on a little longer to make sure he was dead. Although he was carrying a gun, I knew it would be too noisy. Wretch and Yule weren't the only remaining bodyguards at the compound. There were at least half a dozen others. So
I mean, you ain't gotta. Oh, okay. I think you about to take it. I'm about to say you ain't gotta pop you with it right now, but I thought he was not gonna take that mug.
Bodyguards at the compound. There were at least half a dozen others. So I took the folding knife that Pollard always kept in a pocket, and I headed toward the mansion. But as I reached the 4-story crime against architecture,
run, though, doggy ball.
But as I reached the 4-story crime against architecture, I saw no one guarding the doors. Although it struck me as strange.
And you left a gun.
And I headed toward the mansion. But as I reached the 4-story crime against architecture, I saw no one guarding the doors. Although it struck me as strange, it didn't slow me down. I slipped inside through an unlocked service entrance and made my way toward Spec's bedroom, which was on the top floor. Still, I saw no bodyguards. I knew that the rest of the normal house staff would be long gone. It would only be the most loyal of sycophants still left in the house. But I saw no one. I heard no one. Maybe he sent them all home, I thought. But that didn't seem likely. Finally, I came to Spec's bedroom. It was slightly ajar, and as I approached it, knife held tightly in my fist, I glanced through the narrow gap and into the bedroom. There I saw Spec and the girl standing near the bed. The girl's back was to me, and Spec was facing her. Since he was taller than her, I could see his face as he looked down. She was still wearing the sundress. I could see from his bare shoulders that Spec was shirtless. But there was something off about his face. He was looking down at the girl with something like surprise on his face. And that was when the blood splattered the ground between their feet. It wasn't a little bit of blood either. It was as if someone had been holding a large glass of blood they'd just upended. I suddenly realized that what I'd thought all along was wrong. This wasn't a sexual thing for Spec. At least, not only a sexual thing. He was murdering the girl, He brought her so he could kill her.
Stop!
I shouted, shoving the door open and stepping into the room. The girl's head whipped around to look at me, freezing me in my tracks. There was a ragged flap of skin hanging down her face, ripped from the middle of her forehead and down her left eye. But there was no blood and bone underneath. Instead, the rip revealed the dull silver and white of machinery and fiber optic cables. A red light glowed from amid her damaged left eye. What I hadn't noticed from the rest of the room came now into stark relief. The bodyguards were all around the room, but they weren't alive any longer. Wretch was among them, his head twisted around to face his back.
Damn.
They'd been brutally dispatched by this girl, who wasn't a girl at all, and she'd saved Speck for last. The billionaire fell to the floor then, the surprised look.
I mean, I would definitely take this versus me wondering if this is a real story or not at the end, but a robot, huh? Oh, this is wild.
Longer. Wretch was among them.
I like this channel,
his head
dog, I ain't
twisted
gonna lie.
around to face his back. They'd been brutally dispatched by this girl, who wasn't a girl at all, and she'd saved Speck for last. The billionaire fell to the floor then, the surprised look still on his face. Although he still had his boxers on, there was a ragged rip missing from the crotch area, revealing
Pulling
only
his
a
dick
wound
off.
where his genitalia should have been. As the robot turned toward me, she flicked aside what she'd ripped from Speck, sending it splatting into a nearby wall. Her arms and the front of her dress were covered in blood. I just hadn't been able to see any of it when her back was to me. Her eyes fixed on me, and then she started toward me. I ran down the hallway, turning a corner and ducking into a bedroom where I got into a closet. Now here I am. I can hear that robot outside. She has just walked up to the closet door, and she means to kill me for my part in acquiring her. It all makes sense. The group of human traffickers is actually a group fighting against human trafficking. I would think it kind of brilliant if I weren't about to be killed.
What? But if they were against, let it finish. We'll talk at the end.
It all makes sense.
They would, because they wouldn't have forced him to buy one then, because he really didn't want to do it. Like, no, I don't want to do this. This is wrong. This is bad. But they're like, nah, you do it, or we gonna off your family. So at that point, it's like, shit, the ultimatum. Like, what the hell? Let me let it finish, dog.
I can hear that robot outside. She has just walked up to the closet door, and she means to kill me for my part in acquiring her. It all makes
Technically,
sense.
in her eyes, you did.
And she means to kill me for my part in acquiring her. It all makes sense. The group of human traffickers is actually a group fighting against human trafficking. I would think it kind of brilliant if I weren't about to be killed by their murderous robot. Regrets swim in my head. I wish I would have told Speck to shove it. I wish I would have done the full 7 years in prison. Because unless some sort of miracle happens, I'm going to die a very painful death very soon. I slide to the floor, abandoning the knife I took from Pollard. I wrap my arms around my knees as the doorknob turns and the door opens. The robot with the torn face and the blood-covered arms steps in. I shut my eyes and wait for death. When nothing happens after a moment, I open my eyes and look up. The robot is holding a hand out to me. Her mouth opens, and a man's voice comes from inside.
You better get out of here, kid.
The man says, as though through a phone on speaker. He has the slightest Hispanic accent.
You're not going to kill me?
I ask.
We know all about you.
The man says.
We know Speck forced this on you.
He did.
I say.
I never wanted to do it. Not ever.
Go home, kid.
The man's voice says.
Go see your family.
And that's just what I do. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that like button to get notified every time I upload a new video.
That's a dope ass thumbnail. Hey, Dark Web Vault, this channel, hey, storytelling top freaking tier, dog. Dark Web Vault, I know this is only my first video from this channel, has to be the most fire storytelling I've heard from these animated horror stories. Don't get me wrong, I know I just got into it about a couple weeks ago, and I have been underestimating them because I used to go into it with the mentality of they're animated, they're going to be fake. But I have to, I have to remember, even though it's animated, I can still get an amazing story, which I did get. I said, yo, my mind was on so many different levels. I'm like, shit, because even though I'm like, yeah, he's only selling fake IDs, you gonna kick it up this high where it's like, nah, I'm gonna get you back, but I want you to do X, Y, Z. I don't want to say I'm trying to beat around the bush for the YouTube algorithm or whatever. But either way it go, then he start breaking it down. Like technically, if you think about it, What do you think happened with them 7 IDs? Sure, you don't know, and it could be out of sight, out of mind. What you don't know won't hurt you, but it's like, yo, you are still affecting somebody else. Hopefully in a good way, but it could be in a negative way. So I'm like, shit. So he's still about to balance this shit out. But either way it go though, man. Hey, this was crazy. Hey, if you want to check out the original video, definitely I will leave the link to Dark Vault channel in the description below. Do me a favor, click that like button. I appreciate you. But I'm out.